So hi everyone. Thanks for joining the conversation. My name is Ofir Gutzone, co-founder of Unacceptable based in Palo Alto. A couple of words about Unacceptable. We are a grassroots movement focused on saving Israeli democracy, together Israeli expats and world jury. We all really care about what's happening in Israel. We all really care about bringing Israel to the back to the trajectory of a Jewish and democratic state with equality for its inhabitants. And unfortunately, we are here back on those updates where we start the conversation with like we are in day 6 of the war. Um, and we are going to talk today with Noga Tarnopolsky, who has been probably back to back in on news channels all day, in between or even still from the bomb shelter. And Noga, I really want to thank you for joining us and for sharing your perspective of what's going on in Israel and your point of view of on political progress. And we just had a bombshell uh, tonight, right? Maybe the bomb news is not the right when we're bombing everywhere, and everyone is bombing Israel. Iran is bombing Israel, but let's start with what's going on.
Which
And
bombshell are you referring to?
oh, there is more than I know. I'm referring to the one that Trump called President
Oh,
Herzog a disgrace
not for
after
the
he
first
reached
time.
out to him 5 times and he promised him to give pardon. That Barack Ravid reported on Channel
Yeah.
12. So that's what I'm referring to, but you might know more than already. So let's start from the start. Day 6 of the war. What does it look like?
Day six of this war was a heavy day, and it may not yet be over. To the best of my knowledge, Israel is operating very heavily right now, both in Tehran and all over Lebanon. Really, all but the most northern band of Lebanon. Um, and in Israel too. I think it's fair to say that for most of the hours of today, there were sirens sounding at some place in Israel during the whole course of the day. So even though the damage isn't immense, and the loss of life, is significant, actually. I think around 15 people dead, but it's not massive. But the impact on one's ability to live a normal life is massive. So, life has been completely interrupted, and today was another day. I want to add something else. Today was another day in which the government of Israel chose not to speak directly to the Israeli people about what's happening. Day six of the war, and so far, neither the prime minister nor the minister of defense have forthrightly addressed the Israeli people and explained to them what's going on. The minister of defense gave a slogan-filled interview, first interview this evening to the national broadcaster, Channel 11, said nothing. But again, he wasn't at a press conference, he wasn't in the public. Prime Minister hasn't shown his face in public since the war began, has not made himself available to media, and hasn't addressed the public. There hasn't been, the Israeli equivalent of an Oval Office speech. Tonight we had brief remarks, I'd say, from the chief of staff of the army, but this was more kind of a message of safety instructions for the population. Obey what the home front command tells you. Stay in the shelter; it'll save your life. Kind of messages, and a message of kind of rah message for the soldiers. So, as weird as it may seem, Americans have actually gotten a lot more messages from their government, however confused they may be, than Israelis have since last Saturday morning.
And when you talk about messages, I mean, like it seems like Netanyahu is addressing the Iranian people, is addressing the American people with videos. But you're saying that he's not addressing the Israeli people. We just saw tonight a couple of polls because a lot of people are claiming or thinking that this war is obviously a war of choice. We started it as a preemptive attack, as Netanyahu and President Trump was saying. But the question is always like with Netanyahu is what was his motives? And obviously, as some of you know, probably all of you already know, there's supposed to be elections coming up in Israel, formally on October 27, but everyone is trying to figure out if they will be earlier. From what you hear in the polls that are showing up, what do you think about that reality that the war is going to accelerate the upcoming election?
First of all, let's just say that the date of October 27th is the last day under the law that elections can be held in Israel. They can be held at any time before then. My opinion on this matter hasn't changed in I don't know how long, as long as you and I have been speaking about this, Ofir. I think that the prime minister is going to try and put off elections as long as he possibly can. This is not a good time for elections for Netanyahu. And his coalition hasn't managed to get a majority, a governable majority, in any real poll since he took office. In other words, Netanyahu, I want to jump back just for a moment. In 2022, Netanyahu ran his campaign. It was against the so-called government of change at the time that he had thoroughly delegitimized, the only government other than his own that has ruled in Israel in the last 18 years under Bennett and then Lapid. And Netanyahu's campaign slogan was sovereignty and also governance, right? Meshilut, Ribonut, those were his campaign slogans. He was able, barely, but on the last day the law allowed, he was able to cobble together the most extremist government in the history of the state of Israel. It's a government that the former Mossad director, Tamir Pardo, referred to its ministers, not all of them, but several, too many of them, as akin to the KKK. Netanyahu, to cobble together this government, brought together people who just a few years ago were considered beyond the pale. Netanyahu, in fact, until he formed this government, refused to be photographed in the presence of Itamar Ben-Gvir, the former terrorist convicted 13 times of hate crimes and terror associations, who he then made Minister for National Security to gain power. So it started off pretty bad. 4 days after taking over power, the Minister of Justice announced what he called the first phase in a reform of the administration of the state, which is a coup d'etat, pretty clearly stated. And Netanyahu has been even more unpopular than he was before since then. He hasn't succeeded in a single poll. So my opinion, viewing this very simply, is that Netanyahu does not want there to be elections. Netanyahu will agree to elections only if he thinks he can win or if he's forced. And it's unclear to me right now that he will consider the law an obligation. Netanyahu again yesterday, just yesterday, again told Israeli people that the rule of law in their country is over. Yesterday, Ben-Gvir, all of you will be shocked to hear, this same ex-terrorist, Ben-Gvir, has been operating against the law, in breach of the law, in almost all of his actions as the minister in charge of police. This has been an ongoing legal situation with the attorney general involved. Yesterday, faced with his complete defiance and the defiance of Netanyahu, who refuses to rein him in, the attorney general requested that the Supreme Court order Netanyahu to fire him. This was at once expected, and it's also very dramatic. Netanyahu could lose power, in theory, over this. Except Netanyahu immediately put out a statement within an hour saying, Ben-Gvir's not going anywhere, which is basically saying, screw the law. So this is not the first time that Netanyahu has overtly defined his government as a lawless government. And I think for many reasons we should take this very seriously. But one of them is that the only thing that obliges him to hold elections is the law. And even that is shaky because in a situation of national emergency, which Israel has been in continuously since October 7th, 2023, elections can legally be postponed. That was already done during the course of the Gaza war with municipal elections. So I think we have to listen carefully to the former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, who a few months ago issued a warning saying that he had information showing that Netanyahu was trying to cancel or postpone the elections. And I think that the first point of vigilance has to be that, to make sure that Israel actually will go to elections. If that happens, the next point has to be, even with more urgency, to make sure that these are true elections, free and fair elections. Netanyahu has studied the entire civil service with people who are loyal to him and who have an interest in manipulating these elections. First and foremost, and most, I would say, deviantly, the chief of the Shin Bet, who is himself an extremist religious nationalist. The headline in Haaretz when this guy took over was Israel has never seen something like this before. And it's not an exaggeration. He was brought in, basically, in my opinion, as I observe things, he was brought in to make sure no one other than Netanyahu can win the elections. Now, that doesn't mean that's fated, that that's the only option, but it means that's something Israelis have to be very, very vigilant about. And not only Israelis, anyone who cares about having a democratic Israel and a viable Israel has to care very much about both these matters.
So I want to dive deeper into the concept of the election later, but I mean, like one of the challenges that I mean, like I want to try and first review regarding the specific war. What is the opinion, the general opinion in Israel right now about the war? So again, so my sister, my parents, my brothers are all getting in and out like everyone else in the bomb shelters from the north to the south. Um, Purim happened in between. What do we hear from polls or from other sources about the morality, the morale of the people in Israel?
Well, the morality and the morale are not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah,
Um, Look, we have the first few polls that came out basically today, a range of polls. Yesterday, the Israel Democracy Institute brought out a poll. Also, the INSS, the National Security Think Tank. Today, we have the first political poll put out by a guy called Yossi Tatakovich, I think,
Tatakia.
something.
Yeah, yeah,
Tatakia. If I'm not mistaken, he works for Channel 13, I believe, something like that. He works for one of the TV stations.
yeah.
In any event, the IDI poll and the INSS poll are the most serious, and they're very different. They're more academic polls. So what they show, just to state it briefly, is that Israelis across the board, Jewish Israelis across the board, support this war against Iran. And one of my conclusions from that, given how unpopular Netanyahu personally is, and given what he has done to Israel in recent years, is that they believe him regarding the necessity of this war. I know that Israelis have been hearing for 30 years, and for good reason, that Iran presents an existential threat. In Israel, certainly not enough questions have been asked over these last 30 years about what the leaders were doing about it. And the man who has been leader of Israel during most of those 30 years is Benjamin Netanyahu. For reasons that are beyond understanding for me, he's never really been confronted with the question, you've been in power for most of these years. The situation keeps getting worse and more dangerous. What's up? I think that question, I don't know when or if it'll be asked, but that's a crucial question here.
Is it not coming from the people or not coming also not coming from the press?
Neither. The press, the Israeli press, which has been incredibly disappointing throughout the war, the Gaza war, really, truly, I believe it's fair to say, failed in its task of informing the Israeli people about what was happening in their own country, what was happening to their own country, and what was being done by their own country. Um, are failing again. Now, I obviously it's important to underscore there are some journalists about whom this is very, very unfair to say, right? Ronen Bergman, Gidi Weitz. There are some people who have worked extremely hard and really against the trends to do excellent reporting. Nurit Yochanan, I would say, in the West Bank. There are some excellent journalists,
Nir
but the
Hasson, yeah,
media
there, yeah.
the media arena across the board right now in the last 6 days has fallen into lockstep and really is, I mean, the kind of coverage you're seeing in Israeli media by and large or hearing is these are the achievements of our pilots in the last 24 hours. These are the first images of the Iranian installations we bombed to obliteration. I mean, that's really the tone by and large. Not everyone, but by and large, that's what Israelis are hearing. And, again, the fact that lives have been so disrupted, again, people aren't going to work, people aren't going to school, every activity has been interrupted, gyms, festivities for children. The fact of this in a situation, in a context in which life never really fully got back to normal following October 7th. And there was still an extraordinary number of reservists in the field even before this new war with Iran. And so Israelis are kind of numb or maybe kind of believe that this is a just cause. Netanyahu's principal messaging, including in another video clip he issued today, is only I have this kind of relationship with Donald Trump. Only I can get the Donald to do what I want. Today's video was almost Stalinesque. Um, it showed Netanyahu wearing aviator Ray-Bans and a Uniqlo black puffer coat, standing in front of a bank of Israeli and American flags, like as if he's some sort of, I don't know what to say, global ruler. And I read today in a good, very good column by Ravit Hecht in Haaretz that Netanyahu's been particularly smug in recent days. She spoke to a number of people in his close circles. This video really was something else, and the principal message was thank you to Donald Trump, and only I have this level of cooperation. But I want to say something else. This is I believe, the third video, maybe the fourth, that Netanyahu has posted, has put out, has released since this war began 6 days ago. Each of these videos, there were two on day one. Each of these videos is less than a minute long, and they're hermetic, of course, right? One of his aides films him. It's a pre-taped video. There's no interaction with anybody. And they really do, they're beginning to remind me of kind of Kremlin type messaging. They're closed, they're filled with slogans, they transmit nothing, nothing of
I mean, they do transmit. I would say that he is in charge. He is in power. He is. It transmit nothing. In what sense you mean?
they transmit nothing useful or informational for the citizens of Israel. They don't address the needs of the citizens of Israel. Now I'm remembering, this is indeed the fourth video. Their first two came out on Saturday, day one of this war, and they were basically addressed to the people of Iran saying, rise up. Your destiny's now in your hands. Take power. So those were the two first videos. Then, on the day that 9 people were killed by an Iranian 500-kilogram warhead in Beit Shemesh, Netanyahu, instead of going to the scene of the tragedy where was being expected, he got up to the rooftop of IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv and delivered another kind of booster message. He dispensed with condolences for the families in about 30 seconds, and the rest was about how great he is. And today we had this fourth message in front of a bank of Israeli and American flags. I do think that at some point this is going to start going down poorly with the White House because Netanyahu really is acting as if he's the deputy president of the United States. This is not playing well with the MAGA crowd. This is not playing well with many of Donald Trump's people. And it's a confusing reality for Israelis. I could tell you guys one kind of interesting tidbit. Among my criticism of the media, one really interesting thing is happening. For the last 10 years, Israel has had no professional spokespeople. Sounds weird, but it's true. Netanyahu does not have a spokesperson. The government of Israel doesn't have a spokesperson. The ministries, foreign ministry, right? The foreign ministry has a nominal spokesperson, but no one who takes questions, no one who acts as a spokesperson. One interesting thing that is happening in Israel is that seeing even these sort of bizarre spectacles put on by Caroline Levitt at the White House and seeing Donald Trump, speak in front of cameras every single day, this is causing Israeli journalists to feel envy. And so what many of us see as kind of obscenities, right, emanating from the White House press room, something that is very uncommon, right, in the history of what these daily press conferences are like in the White House. For Israelis, it's all of a sudden shocking to see how a functional comms shop in a functional country should be. So that's how bad things are in Israel. That what Americans are considering a catastrophe, lies being told from the podium at the White House, for Israelis, for Israeli journalists, all of a sudden they see what they don't even have. They don't
You
even
mean you
have
don't?
someone
You mean like you prefer to even consume lies, but at least someone is telling you something.
someone who you can interact with, someone you can
Mm.
raise your hand and ask a question to. In Israel, it is hermetic, that there is simply no contact between the government and the people. Yanir Kozin, a journalist for Israel Army Radio, Suleiman Maswadeh, a journalist for the national broadcaster Kan, today, each one of them, and then they were followed by others, Akiva Novik, other journalists, tweeted having seen Caroline Levitt yesterday saying, we don't, we submit questions to the prime minister's office, no one answers, and also there is no one who can answer. So that is a
So
choice. I just want to say a strategic choice made by Netanyahu many years ago, which has brought catastrophe upon Israel on many levels and in many ways. But what we see now, for example, is that when you have Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, or any number of other people actually publicly stating lies about Israel, in some cases, really base lies, in such a complicated situation of war, when you see that the president's kind of hottest supporters in the MAGA camp are expressing very serious doubts about what's going on, there's no one who can defend Israel or even explain Israel on behalf of the state. That's a strategic decision made by the government.
that's that, and at the same time, I see the opposition leaders, Bennett, Lapid, Gantz. We can talk about what Gantz said yesterday, that turned turmoil in the U.S. media. Spending a lot of time to basically stand by the government and basically serve as the spokesperson of this war to basically explain the people of the world why this is a justified war, and when while it make everything look very heroic from their side, at least from what I'm seeing on parallel from the government is slashing them and is not sharing the unity on the same time. So does the opposition actually have being an opposition to the government, or the opposition is playing along? And does it actually strengthen the position going forward in the election, or does it actually serve them the opposite?
So I want to go back to your previous question about the polling because I didn't mention something that's important. I got distracted. The polling is really interesting right now. So on the one hand, we have these more academic polls that show across the board support for military action against Iran, basically. But the political polling, the who will you vote for, who is the best candidate for prime minister polling, those haven't budged this week. Haven't budged. So we will know more tomorrow. There'll be more polls tomorrow. And Israeli polls are notoriously bad. But when you have hundreds of polls, right? We have a trend going back now, let's say even before, but let's say October 7th, 2023, there hasn't been one voter intention poll that has showed Netanyahu with a winning hand. And that was true today in this poll we mentioned by, I can't remember his name ever.
Yossi Tatakia, and also with the
Tatakia.
polls that are coming tomorrow on the Maariv. Yeah.
So I haven't seen the results of those yet. But what's interesting about this is that even those people who believe it's just for Israel to be acting militarily against Iran, that hasn't moved them to support Netanyahu in any greater numbers. And in this very interesting column I read today by Ravit Hecht, again in Haaretz, she describes the Israeli polity as basically static. She said that no heroic videos are going to change the point of view either of those in Netanyahu's base who would just follow him even off a mountain, and those who feel that he's destroying the country and wouldn't vote for him no matter what. She feels that these are static blocks, and the polls for now seem to be confirming that. The other indicators that we have are on two previous occasions during this period of wartime. Netanyahu has believed that he did have a winning hand. The first time was after the beepers, the successful beepers operation that ended the life of Hassan Nasrallah and much of the Hezbollah leadership in Lebanon. And the second was just last June, at the end of this 12-day war with Iran. It was really fascinating to be here at that time because Netanyahu had more or less been a hermit since the start of the war. Netanyahu hasn't shown himself in public barely at all during this war because he doesn't want to have, bereaved parents screaming at him, which is what happens on those rare occasions when he does show his face. And so all of a sudden, after the 12-day war with Iran, all of a sudden he started showing his face, starting around. There was an unhidden expectation that he was the conquering hero of this situation, and it didn't happen. It didn't translate to public support. The protests against him persisted. It didn't translate at all to any change in the polls. My understanding is that the internal Likud polls may even be worse for him than the public polls that we know about, the polls that are published in the newspapers. So, again, going back to my initial point, it's a simplistic way of looking at things. I don't believe that Netanyahu is playing, eight-edged chess. I think he won't call elections until he thinks he can win them or he knows he can win them. And I think that Israel's in for a rough ride to see if the law will prevail, if he will call elections, and if he will allow elections to proceed properly.
And I'll just add, just from the numbers that I've seen. I mean, like just for you already following us. I mean, like the polls from tomorrow is showing that 70 seats are assigned out of 120, assigned to the opposition parties, from Bennett all the way to the our parties, and only 50 or 51 are actually going to the current government. And so yes, it's consistent with the last campaign. And
That hasn't changed in more than 2.5 years. It simply hasn't budged.
that's clearly. What do you hear from? I mean, so you mentioned briefly the MAGA, who is. I mean, actually, I want to take a step back. I know that one of the feedbacks we are going to get on this on this conversation is that instead of like rally around the flag and support the war and clearly state that, which we are, that again the Iranian regime should go away and it's bad for the whole world. We are dealing with politics, right? And the question is like, are we the only one who deal with politics, or is the current government keep doing politics on parallel? Like again, so I would just mention they were planning to bypass the laws for the judicial, continue the judicial overhaul laws this week. The Shikli ministers and others are bashing Yair Lapid and Bennett and Yair Golan and all the other opposition. So I really want you, if you can, I mean, like, speak on what politics is happening right now in Israel and how it's also being influenced by what's happening in the US, because it seems like everyone is like rah rah, as you said, about how we are successfully allied with the USA to make this war happen, but it seems like it's eroding. It's not actually helping Israel in the long run, um, um, bipartisan support in America. So maybe it's two different questions, but I just feel like I'm going to be getting a lot of responses about the politics that we're dealing with, but it sounds like everyone is doing politics, but we just don't hear it mostly on on the American press coming from Israel.
We're definitely not hearing it. I mean, yesterday's news about Ben Gvir and the judicial demand to have him fired, the judicial requirement to have him fired, as far as I know, hasn't been reported outside of Israel at all. And frankly, got very little play relative to how important this is, even in Israel, because of all the war coverage. I labored mightily yesterday to try and report on France 24 TV because I think this is huge news. You know, Ben Gvir is a crucial component of Netanyahu's government. Um, and
And
also,
I would just to note, I mean, like usually a prime minister is saying like you don't, why to deal with politics and firing people around during war. Hello. And today, obviously, we just heard that Trump fired or switched Kristi Noem from her role as national DHS, what it is, Homeland Security. So, yeah, sorry, I had to say that because it
okay,
feels so
so
comparable.
maybe look. I mean, they're two completely separate things, right? This is a government of survival. This is a government of survival, particularly for Benjamin Netanyahu. We haven't yet mentioned he's, of course, on trial. And today we saw another one of his extremely brazen efforts to get his trial canceled. Um, in any event, this is a very political government. This is very much a government of our era, you know, no nuance, a lot of kind of teenage expressions. So this government is acting completely politically. Um, but that's who this government is. It was acting this way until October 7th. It's been acting this way as of 6 a.m. on October 7th. We actually have proof of this now because in some of the few protocols that have come out show Netanyahu consulting his now defunct personal PR team in the very early hours of the morning before he'd even met all of the military commanders. I say now defunct because I'm speaking about his two advisors or three who are now out of his office because they're accused of treason, of being on the Qatari payroll during the war. So, I mean, the magnitude of the politicization and the just mess of this government, the dysfunction, is very difficult to exaggerate. But that's not the only thing that's going on, right? That also goes on, and it's a permanent thing that goes on. This government tries to pass authoritarian laws every single day, at war, not at war. The government tries to stuff all the civil service posts with personal loyalties before the war, during the war. That's just like a straight line. But there's another point that you alluded to, and that's in this war, Israelis have been given the expectation that they might be able to change the regime in Iran and that they might be able to help the Iranian people. An extremely bizarre proposal to give Israelis, some of whom, hundreds of whom, haven't yet had their homes restored to them that they lost during the previous Iran war. Okay, that's how dysfunctional the government is. There are interviews on the street with people who are already refugees from the houses that were destroyed in June, that where renovations haven't even started, and they now have had to flee the places they had fled to. I mean, the situation is very chaotic and dysfunctional. That said, I want to go back to the question of messaging and also strategy, because here it does come together. We haven't heard any real plan for how this Iranian regime could be toppled, how the Iranian people might take over, what that would mean. There's a big element of fantasy in this entire situation. And that could boomerang very violently against Netanyahu. If this war continues as we're being told here in Israel that it will for at least several more weeks at this pace, if there are 15 Israeli civilians killed every week, there are soldiers injured, there are call-ups of more than 100,000 reservists. We've seen that day one. If this situation continues, at some point, Israelis will be demanding what's the plan. That is, by the way, what happened with Gaza. Remember that after the shock of October 7th, once Israelis were able to even utter a word, there was an across the board consensus about having to fight Hamas. 2 years later, there was almost, not quite, but a very broad consensus that this war was out of control, that the lives of the hostages were being sacrificed on the altar of a never-ending war. And those protests on the street had a significant impact. They had an impact on Netanyahu's ability to keep governing in the way and to keep the war going. But they also had an impact on Donald Trump, who the family members of hostages and even the Israeli protest movement, they were very successful in getting through to the Oval Office and making sure that message was heard. And so when Donald Trump and his team, principally Witkoff and Kushner, decided that it was, from their point of view, time to put an end to this war, they knew they had the support of the people of Israel, right? So I don't think that Netanyahu has an eternal leash here. I think that even if, I don't know what it was, 97% of right-wing Jews in this country believe that this war is justified, 70 some odd percent of Jewish citizens in general consider that this war is justified. I wouldn't necessarily assume that'll be the case in 3 weeks. Certainly not if people keep dying, and certainly not if the regime keeps persisting. I want to respond to your question about politicization. It's not just that today Donald Trump had an eruption and called the president of Israel, Herzog, a disgrace and lied about him, saying he's promised me 5 times he'll pardon Netanyahu. Herzog cannot even pardon Netanyahu. It doesn't work that way here, but whatever. He could, in theory, in a different circumstance. But right now, as I'm speaking with you, one of Netanyahu's most least impressive ministers, Idit Silman, the Minister for the Environment, is currently calling on Donald Trump to sanction the Attorney General of Israel and the judges of the Supreme Court of Israel as if they were international terrorists. That is a minister of the government of Israel, mid-war, demanding that the President of the United States personally sanction the heads of the Israeli judiciary. So I now will disagree with you, Ofir, when you talk about a judicial overhaul. This is a coup d'etat. This is no overhaul and no judicial. This is an illegal takeover of power. They were legally elected, that's true, but their efforts are to illegally wield that power. And Israel absolutely is in the full storm of that, even as it's in the full storm of a war.
Yeah, that's what we hear as well. And it doesn't seem like there is a big understanding in Israel about the impact that this war is making on the Israeli support, on the support Israel will get in the future from either the Republican or the Democrats. I know that there are people, and we will actually share it later with Israelis. Can you talk more about this impact? And I don't know if you're being asked a lot in the news channels when you're interviewed about that. Is it something that comes up, bothers anyone?
I'm not asked about it all because I don't cover the United States. I cover Israel, I cover Palestine, I cover the war. I don't cover the US. I'm an observer of the situation you described. I think the situation looks pretty grim, but I see this from a distance. Um, but I also, I mean, seen as someone who does cover diplomacy here and international relations, this is not new to me. Prime Minister Netanyahu, again, who has been in power almost consistently for 20 years, a very long time ago made clear strategic choices. So, in the same way that he chose that Israel will not have any kind of national communications bureau, he also chose, he made very serious choices with real consequences. One is to ignore Jewish communities abroad. So, I mean, Netanyahu, for a very long time now, when he's gone to the States, has met with AIPAC and with evangelical Christian leadership, but has not gone to, Central Synagogue in New York. The opinions of diaspora Jews matter very, very little and increasingly little to this government. This is, by the way, a government that considers most Jews in the world not really Jewish. This is a government that operates to benefit the most extremist among the ultra Orthodox leadership in this country. So that has a huge impact. So when you're talking about, how Americans see Israel, Netanyahu hasn't had a communications team in years nationally. Jews who could speak for Israel are treated like crap, frankly, um, and considered semi-Jewish, maybe. And AIPAC itself has undergone a transformation from being more or less a discrete and bipartisan lobby group to being pretty overtly a pro-Netanyahu lobby. And so there have been a number of changes made over a number of years that have impacted this and that have damaged it. There are other things that have nothing to do with, I think I can say, nothing to do with Netanyahu. Um, there are foreign nations that have paid in order to instill pretty anti-Israel views in certain publics, not just in the United States. There's a whole array of issues and influences and matters that I'm not an expert in,
Yeah.
but it would be silly to say that they're not going to have an impact. And this war obviously has kind of burst everything open. So whatever processes were already underway before the war are much, much, much accelerated now.
And so I'll start to pick up some questions from the chat that I'm getting. And one of the questions was, what is the Israeli Palestinian citizens' opinion on the war? And I might recall from the IDI report that 60% are opposing the war. It's not 100%. It's not. It's obviously differently from Jewish. But what have you seen?
Yeah. Well, the IDI poll is the most interesting in this respect.
And
And
I shared the link to the poll on the chat, so for everyone to pick it up.
And it is interesting to see that I think slightly more than 40% of Arab or Arab Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel think that it's a justified war. Remember, everybody, that Arab citizens of Israel have been victims of Iranian nefarious terroristic behavior as much as the Jews. There were Arabs murdered, numerous Arabs, and murdered and taken hostage on October 7th. There was an entire family. I can't remember from where now. A man who lost his wife and two daughters in
In
a
Shfaram,
Iranian
in Shfaram.
in an Iranian missile attack back in June. I mean, when I say that Israelis lost their homes, lost their lives, I'm talking about all Israelis. So that's interesting to me, to the opposite point of view of what you said, that 60 opposed, but that more, actually it's about 60, more than
Mhm.
40 support is interesting. Um, but Netanyahu doesn't have their support. And if the, I would say, Jewish Israeli support for this war is not a promised thing, Arab Israeli support for this is going to be even much more fluid, let's say.
So another question that comes up is obviously we get a lot of a pretty good defense system that's protecting Israelis around everywhere. Like there is bomb shelters. I know that 40% of Israelis doesn't have bomb shelter. I mean, doesn't have mamad, a lock room in their home. But what is the situation in the West Bank at this point? I mean, like, is that? I mean, is Israel intercepting? People are asking missiles as well coming up around the West Bank, or they get alerts, or they get alarms, or any other thing that is protecting people. I mean, the Palestinian, obviously the Jews in the West Bank.
Hang on. So I just have to tell you, I have less than 10 minutes now that I
Yep.
can stay on. Um, yes, the alert system operates in the West Bank. The anti-missile batteries operate in the West Bank. Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, has also been intercepting missiles here and there. Um, there actually, to my knowledge, hasn't been more than an incident with a shard, I think, somewhere in the West Bank. Um, the Iranian missile launches are very different now than they were back in June. So while they are ongoing throughout the day, they haven't been coming in barrages of 80. And there's kind of a debate right now underway about whether this is an indication, as the Israeli government would want you to think, that the Iranian ability to launch missiles has been so severely degraded that they cannot launch more than, one or three at a time, or whether it's a strategy, whether Iran is holding its fire because it wants to keep its ability to launch these missiles for the long haul. Remember, Iran produces its own missiles. That's very significant. It is self-sufficient. That gives it very long, breathing time. And so the other theory is that Iran is intentionally launching just as many missiles as necessary to make life in Israel impossible to live normally, but not so many that they might run out at any foreseeable future. Um,
And
I've
and I would
lost
I
count.
would I would add on that again one of the reports I've seen is that because Hezbollah has joined the war, right? And from Lebanon, then again, I mean, like what you mentioned that counting the missiles coming from Iran, right? I mean, they're being supported by missiles and drones coming from Hezbollah, so it doesn't
Yeah, and
make it.
increasingly
Yeah,
coordinated. So
yeah,
increasingly missiles are coming from both directions at once.
yeah. And I've been stand corrected that the lady and the daughter were killed in Tamra, not in Shfaram. Yeah.
It was
Um,
a woman, her sister, and two daughters, four women altogether,
yeah.
with two women and
Um,
two girls.
Great. So last thing that being asked, and I forgot actually to ask about that, is obviously it's not just Israel and that is being attacked, but the Gulf is being destabilized. And in that sense, what is your assumption? Is Israel going to become like the coming out stronger with relationship with the Gulfies? Or Israel is actually going to become less important or has a smaller voice in Trump ear because there will be much more pressure to end the war coming from the Gulfies.
I've never heard this term before, the Gulfies.
I heard it a
Um,
couple of times yesterday. Yeah.
okay. Look, I don't think those are contradictory. I actually think both of those things could happen at once. The Israeli voice, if this war continues and continues to expand, by the way, it's expanded much beyond the Gulf. All right. Donald Trump did express his shock that Iran had the temerity to attack Gulf Emirates, but They've gone for Cyprus, they've gone for UK base. Today they attacked Azerbaijan, who is none too happy. Turkey, a US base. I mean, this is the Iranian effort is to turn this into, at the very least, a regional war. Iran is very, very isolated, let's say. I mean, Russia is not coming to Iranian defenses. Even China has a complex blend of interests here and is not, for now, giving any particular support to Iran. But I think among the options, both of those things are possible. I think the let's say unique Israeli voice in the American ear could very well become less important if the White House is also presented with a cacophony of not just Arab national voices, but global voices. Europe is very much involved in this right now. Italy, I believe, sent a frigate today. Sri Lanka is involved because of this shipload of Iranian sailors who were shot at by a U.S. submarine. I mean, this is very close to having a global dimension. And of course, in that circumstance, the Israeli voice could be diminished. Although Israel does have a unique role right now as a military partner to the United States, I don't see that diminishing yet. And at the same time, completely unrelated, of course, Israel could gain in relationships, assuming Israel itself manages to extricate itself from its own domestic problems, right? But Israeli military industries could become very, very rich. As a result of this, Israel has really shown the world that it has successfully been able to deploy air defenses. And, also the Israeli Air Force is putting together a remarkable spectacle. The Economist, by the way, has an entire article today about just the purely military success. But let me just say something else. This could also boomerang very, very badly. This Iranian regime may not be as fragile as the United States and Israel hope. There are serious people who make that claim. Today, Donald Trump said that the appointment of Mujtaba Khamenei, the son, the very extremist son of the late extremist Ali Khamenei, is not acceptable to him. I'm not sure the Iranian leadership is going to give a damn whether it's acceptable to him or not. Trump said he has to have the United States, or he have to have a role in the future deciding who will be the future Iranian leadership. I don't think that Iran, for now, I have no reason to think Iran is going to fold over like Venezuela did. So Israel could find itself, the United States could, in theory, at some point slink away. Israel could find itself here in the same region with a much angrier, much more extremist Iran on its hands. That is not an impossible scenario. And if that happens, having a lot of military contracts with other Gulf stations is nice, but Israel will become unlivable. So we have a wide array. I'm not particularly good at prophesying things. I don't know what will happen, but there's a very wide array. By the way, another possibility is that Donald Trump himself and his administration will get spooked. If this war continues as it's gone for the first week, if it continues like this, let's say for another 2 weeks, at some point, the Trump administration may just say, okay, this is time to call it a day. That's what they did with Gaza. That didn't involve US forces, but Israel might find itself simply with an order to quit. That is another possibility. And if that happens, it's not going to come because Israeli interests are being taken into account, but it's going to be because of US interests.
Okay, well, I have so many more questions, but we are running out of time. And I really want to thank you, Noga, for joining us. And I'm sure that was insightful. And I will be posting more stuff coming out in the recording. And if you haven't heard the discussion with Eran Etzion last 3 days ago, the recording is there. And next week we had a planned Zoom to talk about the emigration of liberal Israelis who are leaving the country in the last 2 years with Professor Itai Etter, and I will post it later today because again, it doesn't going to help, unfortunately, what's happening, and that's important thing. And other than that, thank you, Neri, for co-hosting, and thank you everyone for joining. And I'll see you again soon. And don't forget, we have a crucial, important role in helping the pro-democracy camp in supporting the pro-democracy camp winning the next elections, and we will talk more about that. I will end the recording now, and I'll stay for another 15 minutes. If you want to have a question, you want to talk, raise your hand, and I'll take it forward. Noga, thank you again, and have
Take
a
care.
great
Bye bye.
night and quiet night, and hopefully everyone in Israel has a quiet night.
Take care. Bye bye.